Thank you for joining us again today for a journey in the book of Acts. And today's section comes from Acts chapter 9, verses 17 through 19. And since, again, it's just a couple of verses, I'm just going to go ahead and read that for us now. So Ananias departed and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord who appeared to you on the road by which you came has sent me to you so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes. He regained his sight. Then he arose and was baptized, and taking food, he was strengthened. Now, many times throughout Jesus' ministry, he restored the sight of those who were physically blind. Now, the gospel has the power to do that, and sometimes it even still does today, to bear witness to its power. But more importantly than restoring physical sight, that's only temporary, it restores spiritual sight, which is actually eternal. So when the prophet Isaiah in chapter 6 of the book of Isaiah received his commission from God, the first thing God told him to say to the people was, "Keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." So what we see here really is one of the most terrifying, yet at the same time comforting attributes of God, his justice. His justice demands payment for sins committed against him, and according to his justice, he pronounced judgment on the people of Israel during Isaiah's time and caused some to be hardened to the warnings of the prophet. And if God's justice stood alone, he might be viewed as some kind of vicious tyrant or something like that, but it doesn't stand alone. Let's consider the conversion of Saul here. Would God have been just by seeing to the hardening of Saul's heart? Absolutely. We've been following Saul. He's been ravaging the church that Jesus purchased with his very own blood. So yes, God would have been just if he allowed Saul to remain not only physically blind, but also spiritually blind. But again, God's justice doesn't stand alone. He's not just, he's also merciful, gracious, forgiving, and loving. So instead of giving Paul what he truly deserved, which was his justice, he mercifully and graciously intruded into Paul's heart, restored his sight both physically and spiritually by the power of his Spirit through the laying on of hands by Ananias. So here's a question. Could God's grace and mercy, forgiveness and love be fully appreciated without his justice? Well, the answer to that is no. So his justice really serves a purpose in amplifying many of his other attributes when he graciously restores the spiritual sight of those who were spiritually blind and deserved actually to stay that way. Does that make sense to you? So Saul, who became Paul, will later in the book describe Ananias as a devout man, well spoken of those around him. And now this really begs the question, does that describe you? Are you a devout follower of Jesus, and do those around you speak well of you as a result of that close following? Now, Ananias had every reason to be afraid, and in fact, he was afraid to go to Saul. I mean, Saul was a vicious persecutor of Christians, and God commanded Ananias to go to him. But less than being afraid and scared and worried about his own comfort and safety, he was more concerned about being obedient to God, who'd commanded him to go to Saul and restore Saul's sight. And I think may that be the heart of us all. May we just step out in faith and not be so concerned with our comfort and more concerned about being obedient to what God's commanded us to do. The truth is, we're surrounded by people that need spiritual sight restored, and believers are the means that God uses to restore the spiritual sight of those who are still blind. So will we be good stewards of what God's graciously given us and be faithful to share the gospel with those who are still lost? Jesus said, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Now, Ananias was willing to do that. The question is, are we? That's it for today. Thank you for joining us again. God bless you and have a great day.